So most people don't know that Veterans Health Administration is one of the branches of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Most people think anything when you talk about the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, that is it. It's one entity and it's nothing else, and that's actually false. There's multiple branches of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and most people don't know that. So when I talk about different topics, which I'm way too familiar with, they automatically think, oh, they'll say VA or Veterans Affairs, but that's actually not true. So, Veterans Health Administration is one arm of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Veterans Benefits Administration is a second arm, in no particular order, of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. The Cemetery Division is the third branch of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, in no particular order. And then there's the Veteran Experience Office, VEO. That's rather new in the last number of years. I could do a whole segment on that, so I'm not going to bother with it right this second. Well, they keep adding levels of bureaucracy essentially to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, which I strongly disagree with. It's a completely dysfunctional organization. I can't believe, and I had no idea when I joined the military, that there was so much money being made off the backs of military veterans and their families, and service members that are active duty and their families, between all these different government contractors. And there's a union in the federal government that I don't think should be there. And yes, I used to be a part of it, and I had a chance to really evaluate that and research that, and I now have come to the conclusion I disagree with its presence in the federal government for federal workers. So now, I was just complaining and talking some days ago about the bureaucracy in government as a whole at all levels, and how they like to really focus in on employment and job placement is like one of the top things I've noticed when I was a teenager and an adult. Well, and typically those services suck. The people that are there are not they're incompetent, basically. They have horrible attitudes. They're not helping anyone but themselves to check, and it may not even be a very good check. Well, since I talked about that, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Veterans Benefits Administration, VBA, appears has now given out, I think, a $141 million contract. And I think that's something to do with technology, having to do with veterans employment. And now they're going to create another department, these politicians in Congress, for Veterans Benefits Administration to do quote-unquote job placement for military veterans. It's just it's comical. And I guarantee you, they'd be better off just giving the money to the veterans and just telling them to look at TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube for job help, and online look like a chat GPT for help, because that would probably provide more help than this super, super expensive endeavor that they're taking on is going to provide. And they've got the debt ceiling, which was just happening, and all that, and talking about cutting costs and all this deficit stuff. And yet they continue to add on bills to American taxpayers' backs, which I promise you, in my opinion, based upon way too much information I know about the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, is not going to help military veterans, most likely. It's not going to help the majority of them. And so it's here we go, wasting more money yet again. And I really think that the primary motivation for the politicians to come up with more bureaucracy, even though the article said that the Congress people were quoted as saying, "Oh, we're not trying to create more bureaucracy." I'm hedging the bet that they were basically thinking, well, this is more bureaucracy, so it's not true. And B, I'm hedging the bet that because the military is having such issues recruiting, and it's been quoted, this guy at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, who's a commander over there for their basic training units, as saying that this is the hardest military recruiting since the inception in the 1970s of the all-volunteer force. So I think that some of the things that they're doing, which are just outright idiotic, the congressional reps, I think it has to do with they're trying really hard to make it look like joining the military is a good idea. That's what I think they're trying to do. I think they're trying to make it look like it's super appealing. And I think this is part of the strategy. I also think that's why military spouses all of a sudden received a law that's supposed to help recognize their occupational professional licenses from state to state. I think it's because they know the recruiting issue. So I think this is kind of a part of that effort to make it look like this is a great option for you and your family. Join the military. And doesn't seem to be working. And I think it's because people have access to information like this, people like me, and countless others who get to share their experiences and talk about the realities. And I know when I joined the military and when I was a kid and stuff, I had no idea about how bad it was for military veterans and service members and their families. I had no idea how exploitative it was. I had no idea how much people were profiteering off of military service members and military veterans and their families. I had no freaking clue. But this whole civil service system, the whole U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, these congressional reps, this whole system in our government is super exploitative of service members, their families, and military veterans and their families. And, that's all I have to say about that. So I could talk for hours and hours about it, but I wanted to bring up this news about more bureaucracy being added to Veterans Benefits Administration. So now I have.